The afternoon sun hung heavy over Montana City, turning the dust along Main Street to gold. Folks were going about their usual Saturday business when a single gunshot tore the calm apart. The echo rolled down the street like thunder off the hills, sending men diving for cover and women pulling their children indoors. Through the haze of fear ran a young woman in a pale blue dress, Piper Ziegler, the town's schoolteacher. She clutched her satchel tight to her chest, her breath sharp and ragged as she fled down the street. Behind her came the pounding of hooves. 3 riders, faces hidden behind red bandanas, guns drawn, and trouble in their eyes. "Get her!" one barked, his voice slicing through the chaos. Piper's boots slipped in the loose dirt as she darted between wagons, her heart slamming against her ribs. She'd gone to the general store for supplies, nothing more. But now the Hill Gang had spotted her, and the envelope of state money she carried for the school's new books had become a curse in her hands. Her voice cracked as she called for help, but the townsfolk had already vanished behind locked doors. Everyone knew better than to stand against the Hill Gang. They were wolves that roamed the edge of the law, and no one dared be the next sheep caught in their teeth. A rough arm yanked her sideways. Before she could scream, she was hauled up into a saddle. The man's breath smelled of whiskey and dust, his grip bruising around her waist. "Got myself a fine little bonus," he growled, spurring his horse toward the open prairie. The world blurred. The pounding of hooves, the wind ripping her hair free from its pins, the sharp burn of tears. Through it all, she caught one last glimpse of Sheriff Daniels bursting from his office, revolver in hand, but too late. The bandits were already a storm heading for the hills. Far beyond town, Quentin Porter sat atop a chestnut gelding, surveying a stretch of broken fence. At 30, the foreman of the Green Ranch was a man shaped by work and war, quiet but steady as the earth itself. When he saw a plume of dust rising from the south road, his instincts sharpened like a blade. "Riders coming fast from town," he called to his boss, Thomas Green. Green squinted against the light. 4 of them, and one looks to be struggling. Quentin's hand dropped to the worn handle of his Colt. Trouble rode hard in groups like that. As they drew nearer, he saw the truth. A woman slung across one saddle, her pale dress torn against the grit. The Hill Gang. He'd recognize their leader's dappled gray horse anywhere. "Get word to the sheriff," Quentin said evenly. "I'll keep eyes on him." "Quentin, that's madness." But he was already in motion, leading his horse into a patch of cottonwoods by the creek. He crouched in the shadows, watching the riders slow at the water's edge. The woman fought them, even tied across the saddle like she was. Brave little thing. Then his heart sank as recognition struck. Miss Ziegler, the schoolteacher he'd seen at church socials, polite and bright-eyed, always carrying herself with quiet pride. The gang splashed through the creek, their leader barking orders. "She's worth more alive than the cash she's got. Ransom her. Teach that town to pay respect." Quentin's jaw set. He waited until the sound of their hooves faded before stepping from cover. The tracks were easy to read. Fresh, heavy, leading toward the rocky hills. He swung into his saddle, eyes narrowing. He'd seen too much loss in his time to let another innocent vanish without a fight. The ride was rough for Piper. Every jolt sent pain through her body, but she kept her wits sharp, watching for landmarks, anything that might guide her home if she found a chance. When they finally stopped to water the horses, she pleaded softly, "Please, the money's for the children. Take it and go." Rattler Hill, the leader, laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "You're worth more in paper, sweetheart. The town loves its teacher. They'll pay good for you." "And if they don't," she whispered. He smiled, eyes cold as gunmetal. "Then we'll find another use for you." The meaning made her stomach twist, but fear turned to resolve. She wouldn't be anyone's prize. When one of the men, a drunk named Mick, stepped forward to tie her hands, she lashed out, drove her knee into him hard enough to fold him in half. His howl split the clearing. Piper ran. Branches whipped her face, her breath tearing in her throat. She heard the shouts behind her, horses crashing through brush. The ground sloped suddenly, and she tumbled into a shallow ravine, landing hard in icy water. The shock stole her breath, but she forced herself on, limping along the stream to hide her tracks. Behind her, voices cursed and echoed, closer, then farther. Her ankle throbbed. Her dress clung heavy with mud. She stumbled, fell, rose again. The sun dipped low, painting the trees in dying gold. Desperation pushed her forward. Then came the sound, hooves fast and fierce, and the crack of a rifle. A man's shout of pain followed, then another shot, then silence. Piper pressed herself against a boulder, heart hammering. For a long moment, there was only the gurgle of the creek and her own shaken breath. Then a deep voice called, steady and calm, "Miss Ziegler, it's Quentin Porter from the Green Ranch. You're safe now." Her knees nearly gave out. That voice carried something solid, something she could trust. She stepped out trembling. There he was, tall in the fading light, rifle in hand, eyes sharp yet gentle. Behind him, one bandit lay still, the others gone to the wind. Quentin swung down from his horse and approached slow, like a man easing up on a wild mare. "You hurt, ma'am?" "My ankle," she managed. "I fell, and please call me Piper." He nodded once. "We best move. The others'll circle back soon. May I help you up?" When he lifted her into the saddle, his touch was careful, almost reverent. Then he mounted behind her, his arm firm around her waist, steady as a wall. The world still spun, but for the first time that day, Piper felt safe. As the horse turned toward home, she realized she was leaning back into the heartbeat of a man who had followed her through hell without a moment's thought. And far behind them, in the gathering dark, the hills swallowed the last echo of gunfire. By the time they reached the open plain, dusk had fallen across the land. The world was quiet now, painted in soft purples and fading gold, the air cool and smelling of sage and dust. Piper leaned slightly against Quentin's chest as he guided the gelding through the scrub. Each step of the horse jarred her sore ankle, but she bit back the pain. His arm was steady around her, strong as a fence post, and for the first time since the gunfire began, she felt the weight of fear begin to ease. "I've been tracking them since they rode out of town," Quentin said, his voice low near her ear, carrying a warmth that steadied her shaking. "Couldn't just stand by and wait for the sheriff." "You followed them alone?" she asked, half incredulous. He gave a small shrug that she could feel more than see. Didn't see another way. Piper turned her head enough to glimpse his profile, the set of his jaw, the calm in his eyes even after all that had happened. She wanted to say something to fill the silence, but all that came out was a whisper. "Thank you." He didn't answer right away. The reins creaked softly as his horse climbed the ridge. "Wasn't about thanks," he said finally. "Couldn't let him take you. That's all." A moment later, she noticed a dark stain on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she gasped, reaching for his arm. He looked down like he hadn't realized. "Just grazed me some. Nothing worth worrying over." Her teacher's tone returned, despite her exhaustion. "Blood is always worth worrying over, Mr. Porter." He chuckled low, the sound rough but kind. "If I'm calling you Piper, you best call me Quentin." The conversation ended as the glow of lantern light appeared ahead. A cluster of buildings nestled against the dark rise of the hills. "Green Ranch," he murmured. "We'll get you tended there." The ranch house stood firm against the Montana night, warm light spilling from its windows like a promise. Sarah Green met them at the door, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The moment she saw Piper's torn dress and Quentin's bloody arm, she took command like a general. "Thomas, fetch hot water," she ordered her husband. "And my bandages, quick now." Piper was eased into a wooden chair by the kitchen hearth while Mrs. Green knelt beside her, examining the swollen ankle. "Not broken," she pronounced after a minute. "Just a bad sprain. You'll be off it a few days, but you'll mend fine." "I can't impose," Piper began, but Sarah waved the words away. "Nonsense, child. You'll stay till you're strong again. The good Lord would skin me if I sent you hobbling back to town." Across the big kitchen table, Quentin sat stiff as Sarah cleaned and bandaged his arm. He'd refused to be tended until Piper had been seen to, which only earned him a scolding. "Stubborn as an ox," Sarah muttered. "You men think a bullet's just a scratch." Thomas Green came back with steaming mugs of coffee. "You were lucky, Quentin," he said, handing one over. "Wasn't luck," Sarah corrected, tying off the bandage. "Was skill." Thomas nodded with a small grin. "Ah, that's true enough. When this man sets his mind to something, there ain't no stopping him." Quentin only looked embarrassed, thanking her quietly before turning to check on Piper. "You need anything?" She met his gaze, and something passed between them. Something soft and unspoken. "Just rest," she said, but her voice carried more feeling than the words alone. Later, when Mrs. Green helped her upstairs to a small guest room, Piper sank into the feather bed, staring at the flicker of lamplight on the ceiling. Her mind replayed the day, the gunfire, the chase, the fall into the ravine, and always it returned to the image of Quentin riding out of the shadows, rifle in hand, steady as the dawn. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bandits' faces, the cruel gleam in Rattler Hill's eyes. But then another image would rise, the quiet man who'd risked his life without hesitation. That memory dulled the terror, softening it like the first hush after a storm. When morning came, she woke to the smell of coffee and bread baking below. A knock sounded at the door. "Miss Ziegler," came Mrs. Green's voice. "The sheriff's here if you're up for a word." Piper gathered her borrowed nightgown modestly and called them in. Sheriff Daniels stepped inside, hat in hand, his expression drawn. "Morning, ma'am. Glad to see you mended some. I'll need to ask what you remember." For half an hour, she told him everything. The faces, the voices, the road they'd taken, the smell of pine and dust. The sheriff nodded along, scratching notes into a little book. "You've been mighty helpful," he said at last. "We found their camp, but they'd cleared out. Got your satchel, though." He held it out, worn and scuffed but whole. "Money's gone, I'm afraid, but some of your things were still inside." Piper's fingers trembled as she opened it. There, tucked beside her teaching notes, was a tiny photograph of her parents, the one she thought lost forever. Her eyes filled. "Thank you," she whispered. Sheriff Daniels shifted awkwardly. "Just doing my job," he said, though there was a rough edge to his voice. "Can't say the same for folks who go running off half-cocked." Piper's chin lifted. "Mr. Porter saved my life, Sheriff. If he hadn't—" Yes, he interrupted, waving a hand. "Brave, sure. Foolhardy, too. Could have gotten you both killed, but can't argue with results." He left soon after, muttering something about rounding up the rest of the gang. Downstairs, the kitchen glowed with morning light. Quentin was already seated at the table, his arm in a sling, but his back straight as a fence post. He stood when she entered. "How's the ankle, ma'am?" "Better," she said with a faint smile. "And your arm?" "Fine." Mrs. Green snorted as she dropped plates of eggs and bacon before them. "Men, you could be bleeding out and still say you're fine." The sound of her laughter, real laughter, surprised Piper. It felt strange after all that had happened, but good. After breakfast, Thomas carried a chair out to the front porch so she could sit with her ankle propped on a cushion. The morning sun was soft, the prairie wind gentle. When Quentin joined her a few minutes later, carrying 2 tin mugs of coffee, she felt that quiet calm settle around her again. "Mrs. Green said you might like company," he said, handing her one, "but I can go if you'd rather be alone." "Please stay," she said a little too quickly. "I'd welcome it." They sat side by side, the sound of ranch hands and distant cattle filling the silence. After a while, she asked softly, "How long have you been with the Greens?" 10 years, he said. "Started right after the war. Guess I just never left." The way he said it carried a story she didn't press him to tell. She only nodded, watching the horizon turn gold beneath the morning sun. The porch creaked beneath their chairs. Somewhere out in the field, a horse neighed. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Piper felt the world slow down enough for her to breathe again. But deep inside, she knew calm like this never lasted long in the West. The next few days passed with the slow rhythm of healing. Piper's ankle mended under Mrs. Green's careful attention, and Quentin's arm, though stiff, no longer bled through its bandage. The ranch settled into its usual hum. Boots on the porch, the clang of a bucket at dawn, wind whispering through cottonwoods. It was a steady life, far removed from the terror that had chased her out of Montana City. Each morning, after finishing his chores, Quentin would appear on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, the steam curling between them. He never said much at first, only nodded toward the horizon as if greeting the day. Piper grew to like those silences, finding peace in them. "You always ride this early?" she asked one morning as he set down his mug. "Always," he said, "old habit from the army days. The quiet before sunrise feels like the world's still holding its breath." She smiled faintly. "And do you ever breathe with it?" He turned that over a moment, then said, "Not much. Guess I forgot how." Something in his voice carried a weight she didn't pry into. Instead, she told him about her own habits, the way her students used to greet her every morning with chatter and questions, their laughter like music in that one-room schoolhouse. When she mentioned the missing funds for the children's books, his brow furrowed. "I'll speak with Mr. Green," he said. "Town'll see those books yet." "You've already done too much," she protested. He shook his head. "Not near enough." The way he said it left no room for argument. That afternoon, the sheriff's riders returned to the ranch, dust swirling around their horses. Sheriff Daniels dismounted with a grunt and tipped his hat. "We tracked the Hill gang clear to the border," he told Thomas Green. "Two got away into Wyoming territory. We'll send word to Cheyenne." When his gaze flicked to Quentin, there was a note of grudging respect. "You did fine, Porter. Foolhardy, but fine." Quentin nodded once. "Appreciate you saying so, Sheriff." The man turned to Piper. "You've got grit, ma'am. Takes steel to face what you did." She smiled politely. "I had help." "Reckon you did," he said, glancing at Quentin before climbing back on his horse. "Just try not to make my job harder next time." When the riders disappeared over the ridge, silence settled again. Heavy, but not unpleasant. Mrs. Green busied herself with supper, and Piper, though still limping, managed to help with the table. Every so often she'd catch Quentin watching her, not openly, but from the corner of his eye, as if making sure she didn't falter. That night, after dinner, they found themselves once more on the porch. The stars stretched wide overhead, the sky deep as the ocean. A coyote cried somewhere in the hills. Piper wrapped a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You've been quiet all evening," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Just thinking how close I came to not finding you in time." She studied his face, the hard lines softened by moonlight. "You did find me. That's what matters." He gave a small nod, but his eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "World's got a cruel way of taking things if you let your guard down." "You talk like a man who's lost a lot," she said gently. He hesitated before answering. "War takes more than it gives. I came back with a heartbeat and not much else." For a while neither spoke. The wind played through the porch railings, and the night smelled faintly of sage. Then, almost as if he needed to fill the space between them, Quentin added, "I never figured I'd see something worth protecting again. Guess I was wrong." Her heart caught at his words. The quiet stretched, warm and trembling. By the fourth day, Piper could walk with a cane Mrs. Green had found in the attic. The morning sun was mild, the air bright with the hum of bees. Quentin appeared as usual after chores. "You're moving easier," he said, watching her test her weight. "Feels good to stand again," she admitted. He smiled. Small, genuine. "Come on, then. There's something I'd like you to see." He led her out behind the ranch house to Sarah Green's garden, a patch of color and order carved out of the wild. Rows of beans and squash mingled with bursts of marigolds. The smell of earth and blossoms filled the air. "She calls it her bit of civilization," Quentin said, offering his arm as she made her way down the path. Piper laughed softly. "A teacher can appreciate that." They sat together beneath an apple tree, where a simple wooden bench waited in the shade. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was companionable, the kind that grows only when words have already said what they need to. "I had word from town," he said after a moment. "The school board replaced the stolen money. Books'll come on the next freight wagon." Her eyes widened. "That's wonderful. But how did—" "The ranchers pitched in," he said quietly. "Mr. Green started the hat, and I added a little myself. Emotion tightened her throat. Without thinking, she laid her hand over his. That's more than kindness, Quentin. It's heart. He turned his palm upward, their fingers intertwining. Guess I just wanted to see you smile again, he murmured. The warmth of his hand made her pulse quicken. You've done that and more. For a long moment, neither moved. The apple leaves whispered above them. Sunlight dappled their joined hands, and the wind carried the faint scent of rand far off in the mountains. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low, careful. When you're well enough to head back to town, would it be all right if I called on you proper? Not as a rescuer, just as a man. Piper felt the words sink into her like warmth after cold. She hesitated, knowing what the town might say, a schoolteacher and a ranch foreman. But then she looked at him, saw the quiet strength and the kindness behind his rough edges. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. His smile was slow, shy almost. He raised her hand and brushed a kiss across her knuckles, old-fashioned and reverent. From the house, Sarah Green's voice called them in for supper. They rose, still holding hands a heartbeat longer than necessary, before parting with a glance that carried more promise than either dared speak aloud. As they walked back toward the light spilling from the kitchen windows, a breeze lifted the dust around their feet. Piper knew then that something had shifted, something deep and lasting. But in the west, every calm carried the echo of the next storm. 2 mornings later, the wagon into Montana City rumbled past the Green Ranch, and for the first time since the kidnapping, Piper felt the pull of home. Her ankle was still stiff, but she could walk well enough with the cane Quentin had carved her from an old hickory branch. She stood by the porch, her satchel slung over one shoulder, the mountains blue and bright behind her. Mrs. Green hugged her tight. You take care of yourself, dear. Don't go chasing bandits again, if you can help it. I'll try my best, Piper said, smiling through a lump in her throat. Quentin was the one who helped her up into the wagon bed. He said little, as usual, but his eyes spoke plenty. When he finally tipped his hat, she caught the quiet tremor in his voice. I'll be by Sunday after church, if that's all right. She met his gaze. It's more than all right, Quentin. The wagon rolled away, dust swirling in the air. She kept her eyes on him until the bend in the road took him out of sight. Montana City hadn't changed much. Same wooden storefronts, same barking dogs, same smell of leather and coffee drifting from the general store. But to Piper, it all felt different. Every sound and shadow seemed sharper now, more alive. She'd walked through fear and come out the other side, and it had changed the way she saw everything. The townsfolk came to greet her, Mrs. Hanley from the bakery, old Mr. Pike, who delivered the mail, a handful of wide-eyed students who threw themselves into her arms. She gave them the short version of what happened and saved the rest for her journal. Some stories, she decided, were meant to be told slowly, in quiet rooms, when the heart could bear to remember. That Sunday, the church bell rang clear and bright under the summer sky. When she stepped outside afterward, there he was, Quentin Porter, hat in hand, wearing his best shirt and looking about as nervous as a man could look. In his other hand was a small bouquet of wildflowers, stems bound neatly with twine. Miss Ziegler, he said, his deep voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You said I might call. "You're right on time," she answered, smiling as she took the flowers. "And it's Piper." They walked through town side by side, aware of the curious glances, but choosing not to see them. She told him about her plans for the new school term. He told her the sheriff had finally driven the last of the Hill Gang clear into Wyoming. "World's a mite safer now," he said. "Thanks to you," she replied. He shook his head. "Takes more than one man to chase away shadows." Their Sunday walks became a habit after that. Sometimes they went down to the creek where they'd first met beneath the trees, the water whispering over stones. Sometimes they just sat on her small porch, reading or talking about the ranch, the school children, the weather, or nothing at all. The town gossiped. Of course, folks always did. But Piper found she didn't mind anymore. She learned that what people whispered rarely mattered compared to what the heart knew to be true. As summer ripened into fall, the air turned sharp and sweet, and the cottonwoods flared gold. The harvest dance came in late September, the biggest event of the year. Piper wore her best dress, a deep blue that set off her eyes. Quentin met her at the door, cleaned up and straight-backed in a new suit that made her heart skip. "You look mighty fine," he said, his usual calm faltering for once. "So do you," she replied, her cheeks warm. They danced only once, but that was all it took. His hands were steady on her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. The room seemed to fall away, the fiddles, the laughter, the spinning couples, all fading to the rhythm of her heartbeat and the gentle sway of his steps. When the music slowed, he leaned down. "Step outside with me a minute." The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and wood smoke. The moon hung low, and the stars stretched clear across the Montana sky. "I ain't a man of fancy word," he said, turning her hands in his. "Never been good at talking what's in my heart, but these past months, they've been the best I can remember. When I saw those outlaws drag you away, something in me near broke. I swore if I found you, I'd never let fear take that kind of hold again." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box of smooth, carved pine. "Made this myself," he murmured. "Open it." Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band with a tiny pearl nestled in the center. "It was my mother's," he said. "Only thing I've kept from back east. Piper, I love you. Would you do me the honor of being my wife?" The tears came before she could speak. She looked up through them, smiling. "Yes, Quentin, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her close. The kiss that followed was soft and certain, the kind that seals two lives together under the open sky. The stars above them glittered like witnesses. They were married in October beneath the turning aspens, their leaves shining gold against the mountains. The whole town came out, even Sheriff Daniels, who'd once called Quentin reckless, but now tipped his hat with quiet pride. The Greens stood beside them, smiling through tears. After the vows were said and the laughter began, Thomas Green handed Quentin a folded deed. "Been keeping 20 acres aside," he said gruffly. "Land with good water and timber. Figured it's time it went to the right hands." Quentin was too moved to speak. Piper threw her arms around the old rancher, her heart full to bursting. That evening, when the newlyweds rode toward their new land, the setting sun turned the prairie to fire. The house they would build wasn't yet more than a dream, but in that golden light, it already felt like home. As they rode, Piper leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You once said, the world takes things when we let our guard down," she whispered. "Maybe sometimes it gives back too." Quentin smiled faintly. Maybe so. Maybe it just needed a reason. The wind carried their laughter across the empty fields, mingling with the call of distant meadowlarks, and behind them the light faded into night, wrapping their promise in the quiet hum of the frontier. But neither of them knew that the hardest, truest part of love was still ahead. The building, the keeping, and the years that test what the heart swore beneath the stars. Winter rolled in early that year, sweeping over the hills like a slow tide of white. Quentin worked on till dusk, hammering timbers and fitting shingles on the cabin he'd promised his bride. By Christmas, the small home stood proud against the wind, a single room with a stone hearth and a roof that groaned when the storms passed, but warm, solid, and theirs. Piper filled it with life. Books stacked near the fire, quilts stitched with care, the smell of bread rising each morning. The neighbors said the place felt different from any other on the prairie, like it carried peace in its walls. Maybe that was true. By spring, they'd added a lean-to for animals and a patch of garden that caught every bit of sun. Quentin fenced pasture while Piper taught at the schoolhouse, still making the dusty ride into town each weekday. And when evening came, he'd be waiting, always waiting, lantern lit, coffee brewing. That July, under the rumble of a summer storm, their son came into the world. Tiny, red-faced, perfect. They named him James Thomas Porter, after both their fathers and the man who'd given them their start. Quentin held the boy like something holy, his rough hands trembling, as if afraid the miracle might vanish. "I never thought I'd have this," he said softly, tracing the baby's cheek. "After the war, I figured some things weren't meant for men like me." Piper smiled, tired but glowing. "What kind of things?" "Peace," he whispered. "When ain't no family, belonging somewhere." She touched his face, her voice a thread of warmth. "Sometimes what we think is lost just hasn't found its way home yet." Outside, the thunder faded. Inside, love settled into the room like another kind of light. The years that followed came hard and beautiful all at once. They built their dream house, piece by piece. A wide porch, a second room, the smell of pine always fresh in the air. The ranch grew, cattle fat and strong, chickens in the yard, rows of vegetables bright with green. Piper's students adored her, and when she brought little James to class, the children treated him like a mascot. By the time he turned 2, she'd returned to teaching part-time. Quentin hired hands from town, but he never strayed far from the land, saying the soil told its secrets only to those who listened. One Christmas morning, when the world outside lay silent under snow, Piper took Quentin's hand and told him she was expecting again. He laughed then, a full, deep sound that filled their cabin and broke the hush of winter. "A baby," he said, eyes wide with wonder. "Our baby." After that day, he worked harder than ever, building a larger home before the snows came again. By July, their second child, a girl named Sarah, was born beneath the same wide Montana sky that had once witnessed gunfire and fear. Now it heard laughter instead. Years moved like water down a stream, quiet, sure, unstoppable. Their third child, Robert, came in 1886, round and loud as a sunrise. The ranch flourished. Piper's writing did too. Her stories, tales of courage, kindness, and the Frontier found their way into print, published under her maiden name at a Denver press. She'd written the first one late one night, by lamplight, her son asleep beside her, and Quentin fixing a latch on the door. When the letter arrived, months later, saying her book had been accepted, Quentin just grinned and built her a small study beside their bedroom. Every voice needs its place to echo, he told her. He'd sit by the fire in the evenings, reading her stories aloud to the children. His deep voice gave every word weight, and sometimes Piper caught him watching her as he read, quiet pride shining behind his eyes. They weathered droughts, bad winters, lean seasons, and good ones. Whatever came, they faced it together. Folks around Montana City came to see them as a steady pair, the kind of love that didn't burn quick and bright, but slow and lasting like embers in a stove. By 1898, 20 years had passed since the day Quentin rode into those hills. James had gone east to college, the first of their kin to do so. Sarah was 16 now, bookish and kind, while Robert followed his father everywhere, already learning the work of the land. That autumn, the sky over Montana was clear and endless, the mountains brushed with snow. Piper and Quentin sat on their porch, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the sunset turn the peaks to gold. She looked at him, the gray in his hair, the lines etched deep from sun and laughter, and her heart filled to the brim. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what might have happened if that gang hadn't taken me that day?" Quentin's thumb brushed her hand. "Reckon I've thought on it. Maybe our paths would have crossed some other way. Maybe we'd have danced around each other for years. But I like to think what's meant finds its way, one trail or another." Piper leaned her head against his shoulder. "The quiet foreman and the schoolteacher," she murmured. "Sounds like a story even I might write." He chuckled low. "Reckon you already did." They sat that way a long time, the sky deepening to violet, the first stars kindling overhead. Somewhere in the pasture, a cow lowed softly, and the wind whispered through the grass. Quentin turned toward her, his voice barely above a breath. "I'd still follow you, Piper, to the ends of the earth, if that's where you needed me." She smiled, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of his face. "No need, cowboy," she said. "I'm right where I belong." He kissed her then, slow and sure, a promise renewed after all the years. Inside, their grown children moved about their nightly routines. Outside, the land stretched wide and peaceful beneath the same stars that had watched them from the start. What began in dust and danger had become something far stronger. A life built on courage, devotion, and the kind of love that never quits, no matter how long or hard the trail. And as the last light faded from the sky, the wind carried their laughter, soft, steady, eternal, across the open plains.